Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Andy Stone, and I'm calling on behalf of the HIV Advocacy Network. We're a grassroots group of activists in the Bay Area fighting to end the HIV/AIDS epidemic and to improve the lives of communities impacted by HIV. We're calling in to support the Equity for HIV budget proposal that is being championed by the HIV/AIDS Providers Network, as well as the San Francisco HIV Planning Council and the Getting to Zero Consortium. Can you please play our video for the HIV Advocacy Network?
So we have Billy assisting us again. That was the HIV Advocacy Network. And just one moment, sorry.
It's Farouk Borras Hernandez. I am a comedian, writer, performer, proud San Francisco resident, here to tell you that you better support the Equity for HIV budget proposal, including those extra $3 million. Living here in this beautiful city, I've had the honor of becoming friends with and making art with a lot of incredible long-term HIV survivors. San Francisco would not be what it is today without those people who are still here, and a lot of them are facing an incredibly terrible crisis, a housing crisis. Some of them are still suffering, and over 2,500 people living with HIV, including many of them, those elders that I'm talking about and long-term survivors, are in need of housing subsidies to be able to stay in this impossibly expensive yet beautiful city of San Francisco. Housing affordability is a crisis, and we must do more to protect these elders and prevent them from being forced out of San Francisco, out of care and away from critical sources of community and psychosocial.
Thank you, Billy. If we can move on to the next video, please.
$3 million in additional housing subsidies.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Cesar with the HIV Advocacy Network, and I'm an advocate for the Compassionate Alternative Response Team. I live in San Francisco, and I'm a person who's living with HIV and who was unhoused in San Francisco for several years. I urge you to support the Equity for HIV budget proposal, as well as to fund CART-SF. As a person who survived an overdose back in 2010, I'm asking for $2 million for overdose prevention services and for the city to respect the human rights of drug users by decriminalizing all drugs, by not spending any money to enforce the violent war on drugs. Instead, spend $3 million for housing subsidies for people living with HIV. As July 1st approaches, I feel the risk of losing my housing increase, and it's devastating my mental health. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Harry Bro, and I've lived in this town since 1970s. And I'm now 76 years old and a long-term survivor of AIDS. During the 70s, I was part of the psychedelic group that were taking drugs, but there were seldom, not never, but seldom overdoses that occurred from the psychedelic drugs that we took. The drugs today are much stronger, and they are killing people at a much higher rate. As I understand it, there was more killed from overdosing on drugs this year than from COVID in this city. It is not the nature of San Francisco to be a less compassionate, but more compassionate. And we need safe clinics, or whatever you want to call them. Overdose prevention sites is what I'm calling them. And we need to take care of the overdose problem by solving that and giving them a fair treatment. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Curtis Bradford, and I'm a longtime Tenderloin resident and co-chair of the Tenderloin People's Congress. And I'm also a part of what's known as the AIDS generation, or a long-term survivor of HIV. I first diagnosed in 1985. Living in isolation on SSI in a Tenderloin SRO, it was very lonely, painful, and it created all kinds of additional social and emotional challenges for me. And our single seniors are struggling alone and in isolation and dying alone when they don't need to. I'm asking today for $300,000 to fund mental health services for long-term survivors of HIV, folks like myself who we don't want to see alone, dying alone without hope. We can change that.
Good afternoon. My name's Paul Aguilar. I'm a fourth-generation native San Franciscan who's been living with AIDS since 1988. And just this last October celebrated 28 years sober. When AIDS hit in June 1981, I had just turned 18. My friends started dying that August, and they never stopped. when you are the sole survivor of your entire circle of friends, it takes its toll. 40 years of that kind of loss and that kind of grief takes its toll. The isolation and PTSD brought on as a survivor of those years has led many of my colleagues to choose suicide because they no longer saw a place for themselves in a society that has forgotten about them and seemingly doesn't care. That's why I'm asking you to support the Equity in HIV funding and specifically to fully fund the $300,000 we're asking for long-term survivors' access to mental health services. Thank you.
Budget Committee members, my name is Michael Hampton. I live in District 6, and today I'd like to ask you to fully support and fund the HIV equity budget proposal. And that would include $300,000 for mental health services for the HIV community, and also a $3 million housing subsidy for the HIV long-term survivors and our community. And those funds are critical to our well-being, and I certainly appreciate your help and support in making sure that happens. Thank you.
Hi, Supervisors. My name is Dianna Sharpe, and I am a member of HAN and the director of a small arts-based nonprofit here in San Francisco. I'm recording this to ask you to fully support the Equity for HIV Ask, and specifically the $3 million housing subsidy for people living with HIV. And why that is important to me is that professionally and personally, I work with the long-term survivors, many of whom have become really dear friends to me, lifelong friends. And many say that they are really afraid of losing their housing because they don't want to leave the city because they have the best medical care that they will get in the country they know is at our great hospitals here in San Francisco. And they do not want to go somewhere else because they won't have as good medical care. And then they're really scared to lose their community of friends because aging is hard enough, and aging with HIV, you need your friends.
Good afternoon, members of the Board of Supervisors. My name is Michaelrupay. I'm a San Franciscan, and I'm president and board of directors for a co-op for low-income people living with HIV and AIDS in the Mission called Marty's Place. I'm here to ask that you consider fully funding the HIV equities budget. And today I'm asking for $3 million to support housing subsidies for people with HIV and AIDS in San Francisco. Funding this would be beneficial for many of our residents and people in our community. Thank you so much for considering this ask and for your time.
Hi, my name is Matt Levine. I've been a San Francisco resident since 1989, excluding a few years helping out my family back east. And I've been HIV positive about 35 years. And I'm here today to just encourage and really request your support for the HIV equity budget proposal, and it gets funded in full. And in particular, of real concern to me is the $3 million funding for HIV housing subsidies. I'm fortunate enough to work, but being unemployed during the pandemic, I was literally talking to my sister about what I would do if I couldn't afford to pay my rent. And currently, I finally went back to work a week ago, but I know a lot of my friends are not so lucky and aren't able to work. And just, you guys know the importance, and I'm thankful that we have the opportunity to testify today. Thanks very much.
Hello, my name is Caitlin Bishop, and I am calling in today with the HIV Advocacy Network, urging you to support essential and life-saving funding for the San Francisco HIV community. Today, I'm advocating for $300,000 to fund mental health care coordination to address mental health care concerns for long-term survivors of HIV and AIDS. Through volunteering with the HIV Advocacy Network and San Francisco AIDS Foundation, I have had the great privilege of meeting and getting to know members of the HIV community who were and continue to be the most affected by the HIV and AIDS epidemic. The height of the AIDS epidemic may be behind us, but the outfall of that era still resides within our community, specifically within long-term survivors who face a myriad of unique physical and mental health care needs that are often overlooked or misunderstood. One of the greatest unmet needs identified by long-term survivors is comprehensive and accessible mental health care to address issues including complex PTSD, racism, sexism, homophobia, and the re-traumatizing impacts of the 2020 COVID pandemic, amongst others. Please fund $300,000 to ensure long-term survivors of HIV and AIDS have comprehensive access to mental health care services. Thank you very much for your time.